In this session, I would like to take the opportunity to tell you a little bit more in detail about what this field school is about and what we hope to accomplish together in these next 2 weeks that we'll be spending here in Lamphun. So I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about what we can think of as the changing definition of cultural heritage. And what we've seen is a shift, a turn from the tangible to the intangible. Now, I think many of you are very familiar with the UNESCO Convention concerning the protection of world cultural and natural heritage in 1972, which is also commonly known as just the World Heritage Convention. Okay, and since this time, the field of heritage preservation has really focused very much on material culture, the conservation of material culture, and particularly the built landscape. And if we look at how the World Heritage Convention actually defined heritage, world cultural heritage is defined as monuments and sites of universal value. We have some examples, of course, from the Mekong region that you are all also familiar with. We have the town of Luang Prabang, Angkor Wat in Cambodia. We have Ayutthaya, the historic town of Sukhothai, and Hoi An, ancient town, which are just to name a few. Okay. However, in looking at this changing definition, over the past 2 decades, we've seen that the meaning of heritage has begun to shift and expand to include intangible culture. And this has culminated in the adoption of the UN Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage in 2003. Now, what does this convention do? It's calling upon governments, cultural organizations, and local communities to collaborate and work together in the identification, protection, and revitalization of the oral histories, languages, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festivals, and local knowledge and skills that constitute a vital source of the world's cultural inheritance. And in terms of the countries that are participating in this field school, that have already ratified the convention, we have Bhutan, Cambodia, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Lao PDR. Now, let's look at the role of museums in safeguarding ICH. So what is the role of museums specifically? So museums have actually been widely recognized as important partners in this endeavor to safeguard intangible cultural heritage. Richard Curran, who's the director of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., has said, and this is a quote from him, "Perhaps the most appropriate type of organization to take the lead role in the realization of the convention is the museum, or a museum-like cultural organization, because content-wise, they often cover the areas included in the convention. They are cultural preservation institutions by their very definition." And according to the latest definition of a museum that's been put forth by the International Council of Museums in 2007, a museum is an institution that acquires, conserves, researches, communicates, and exhibits the tangible and intangible heritage of humanity and its environment for the purposes of education. And yet, if we look at what Curran and others have pointed out, that expanding the scope of museum work to include intangible heritage presents a number of significant challenges. So, some of the key challenges of safeguarding intangible cultural heritage. First of all, most museum professionals are trained to work with material heritage rather than intangible heritage. So this means, generally speaking, they're taught methods and techniques for collecting, curating, and interpreting objects. Okay. But to engage with intangible cultural heritage, this really requires a very different set of skills and methodologies. Intangible cultural heritage refers to the living cultural practices and traditions which are part of identity and a way of life for groups and communities. So for museum and heritage professionals to work with and learn about this intangible cultural heritage, they must first endeavor to broaden the scope of their focus to include the living culture in their own localities. And secondly, a second challenge is that museums are generally accustomed to being the experts about how to curate, conserve, and interpret their collections. So, but if we look at the 2003 convention, the convention calls for a very different approach, and one that is a participatory approach to heritage management, one which recognizes the culture bearers, the owners of culture, producers of culture, as the primary experts vis-a-vis their own practices, narratives, knowledge, and traditions. So to work with intangible cultural heritage, museums must first acquire the tools for learning from culture bearers and engaging with them as equal partners. A third challenge is that traditional museums have generally been defined and contained by their buildings. But to contribute to the revitalization of intangible cultural heritage, museums must reach beyond the walls of the museum to build lasting relationships with local constituencies. So what do we aim to do in this field school then? We hope to offer museum practitioners and heritage practitioners some of the conceptual tools and practical methods for learning about intangible heritage and incorporating it into museum activities. And as Dr. Parita has already said, to do this, the field school draws on anthropological methods and concepts for the study and interpretation of cultural practices. So why are anthropological approaches valuable and useful for this endeavor of safeguarding intangible heritage? We can look at one definition of anthropology, very straightforward. Anthropology explores what it means to be human. Anthropology is the scientific study of humankind in all the cultures of the world, both past and present. Okay. So, looking at anthropology's long-standing commitment to the study of human cultural diversity and also this discipline's accumulated knowledge and experience in researching culture, there's no question that this discipline of anthropology can offer important tools to the global effort to safeguard ICH. One anthropologist, Peter Nass, has mentioned with regards to the ICH Convention that the mandate to safeguard intangible heritage is a significant milestone in the discipline of anthropology. This is the first time that cultural expressions have been taken as a subject of worldwide intergovernmental policy in such detail.